Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 4, Part 4, the final season of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I'm going to let you know ahead of time. I'm going to be jumping straight into spoilers. I'm going to be talking about the entire fourth season, Part 4, so on and so forth. So if you have not seen the entirety of it, do not listen to this because I will spoil things for you. You have been warned. In general, how I felt about the season, I thought it was great. Some laughs, some interesting developments. The story went in certain routes I wasn't expecting. I won't lie to you. I'm going to go ahead and say it straight off the bat. That final bit of the final episode made me tear up. I was weeping. I was like, no, the feels. I always feel weird when stuff like that makes me cry, but it's just like, that's who I am, I guess. I've done it multiple times over the course of many different shows, but this just turned out to be no other. Like, that whole situation at the end just made me cry. I broke down, dude. I was like, yeah, 28-year-old dude. I'll admit it. I broke down. I teared up, But, regardless, I'm going to be, talking about some of the stuff over the course of the season, just my thoughts about some of the things that went down. I'm not going to be covering anything in any particular order, to keep my thoughts at least somewhat, in order. I made a list of just different topics I wanted to cover. I should do this more often, but I'm going to try and do it more often from now on. So, just working my way through the list. First thing on my list was talking about how I thought this season was interesting because of where we start off with Sabrina. Obviously, after the aftermath of part 3, where she was like, obviously Sabrina Morningstar gets to be Queen of Hell, but Sabrina Spellman gets to be a normal teenager. She's like, that's what I thought I want. But then basically things don't work out the way it is almost like grass is always greener on the other side, because for Sabrina, she felt so alone because because she felt like she was losing everything around her, because it's like her friends and her family is like, she wanted to spend time with them. But obviously like Zelda and Hilda, more so Zelda, is doing everything with the academy. Even Ambrose is kind of in the lonely, I have no one club, because obviously him and Prudence broke up last season. And now obviously Sabrina's going through the same thing, because obviously between her and Nick. But obviously it's like Robin and Theo are together, so is Roz and Harvey, and she's kind of left alone and not having anyone. So it turns into this complicated thing of like, she feels like, since there's no monsters or anything to deal with, like what's left for Fright Club to come together, and face, so I thought that was such an interesting development for her, where it's just kind of like even questioning like, did I pick the wrong choice? Because she kept thinking like, maybe I should find out how life is with Sabrina, a Morningstar, to find out, how life worked out for her. And it turns out later on, as we find out, it actually kind of worked out much more favorably for her. But still, I even like the whole fact is that she tried, thanks to Hilda, which I thought that was so interesting that Hilda gave her that suggestion about being a little sneaky, causing a problem for them to come together. But then it was like, I like that, like when they resolved the situation, Roz was looking at her, I was like, right, Roz has got the cunning. So of course, like your bestie would like be able to see through you. It's kind of, it's interesting how that would work out like that too. But Sabrina admits like she felt like, what they had together was going to disappear. And Ross said something I thought was kind of fascinating. She's like, you think we changed? What about you? Ever since your 16th birthday, all you've done is change. Your life as a witch, your life as a queen of hell. And it's like, we're actually the ones that got left behind. So now it's a situation of like, because for Sabrina, she was hoping that when it was all said and done, she was fighting to get back the life that she had before. But the fact is, so much has happened. So much has changed for so many people in many different regards. They're not the same people they were a year ago. And I should preface that. Well, not even a year ago, but many, many months ago, because I think that's such a fascinating thing. And this season, maybe the previous seasons they confirmed it. I don't think, having rewatched season 3, I don't think they said it in that, but it's interesting because like you kind of forget it hasn't even been a year. Like literally this entire 4-part series, 4 seasons, all took place literally over the course of a year. A little more so than I think. Definitely more so over the course of a year, which I thought was fascinating, because even Riverdale like takes place because if I'm not mistaken, like I could be wrong, obviously they're seniors now, but I think they were freshmen at the beginning of the series. Could be mistaken, it's been a while, so I might not remember that, but they've definitely aged. It's been years, so it's just interesting for it to only have been months because even looking at part one went from a little before Halloween till Christmas, because a Christmas special, so it was just interesting that took place over the course of like a month-ish, over the course of 2 months more specifically. But, I just thought that was kind of fascinating. I'm going on a huge tangent and all that. But circling back to my point, I just thought that was interesting. It's like, she wanted life to be what it was before, but it's like, no, like they're finally catching up because they're changing in their own right. And Sabrina's just not, used to that. Like I said, she was just so, and to me, I always think that's such an interesting thing about Sabrina is that she always kind of wants everything her way. I mean, to be fair, that's her being naive as a teenager, thinking like, oh, like I can skirt the rules, skirt the loopholes and get what I want, because she's a teenager who obviously she has a strong sense of justice and always wants to do what she believes is right in many different regards. Obviously, that's something that obviously Sabrina Morningstar feels that way too, because obviously she's keeping up the whole we need to reform hell type of situation. But it's that thing of like, you always want to try and find a way to get everything you want without having to pay the price. There's always going to be a price to pay. And it's actually, this season might be the first season that, because even Ambrose was like, wait, you're going to take responsibility for shit? And he was like dumbfounded by it. And it's like, yeah, she was willing to be like, no, you're 100% right, Ambrose, this is my fault. This is on me. So I'm going to come clean to the aunties about it. And, about the whole two Sabrina things, what we'll get to later. But I just thought that was so... That's always just been an interesting aspect of her character. We've seen that continue season after season, or part after part, So I just thought that was kind of fascinating all in its own right. But since I did bring it up, it's interesting because that whole feeling empty thing, once again, it's just like her situations always end up being what causes the issues, because it's like everything with the Eldritch Terrors, like some of that comes her direction just because of how lonely she's feeling. Hell, even her getting drunk at Hilda's it's supposed to be giving the toast and she's drunk and everything, and I was just like, oh, and just like making, and I love that she was like, and Melvin, I mean, nothing against Melvin, but it's like, honestly, under those sweaters and stuff, he is deceptively ripped, and I was so bummed. I'm like, we never actually got to see what Melvin looked like. I mean, whether he was really ripped underneath all that or not. I just thought that was so interesting. Yeah, being like, oh, my ex-boyfriend Harvey and my best friend, I'm like, oh boy. It's just like, oh, you just feel so bad for Sabrina. It's like, oh, and then like Zelda's calling her selfish and stuff like that, which is interesting because Hilda called her selfish, because it's like, oh, of course you want to take my wedding and kind of make it all about you and about how you want to handle it and stuff like that. Because obviously for Hilda, it's like, I wanted to be small. We dressed up in costumes and stuff like that. I don't know. Also, like, I'm wondering, am I reading too much into it? Like, Sabrina's costume, is that supposed to be like an homage to like Sabrina from the comics? Because it didn't seem like it was just Sabrina from like the comics this is based on. It seemed like just like the costume she was wearing, the wig and everything, it seemed like it was legitimately like maybe Sabrina from like older Archie comics. Like I said, maybe I was just reading too much into that. Since we're on the topic, since I brought up the topic earlier of the other Sabrina, I thought that was so interesting seeing, like, what surprised me was the Caliban thing. I was like, wait, what? You let him out? I was like, okay. I didn't expect we see Caliban. I thought he'd stay frozen forever, where they left him at the end of part 3. But I was like, oh, and you're dancing, you're happy with him? And even later on, Sabrina being like, Spellman being like, wait, what? Caliban, he tried to kill us. He's like, yeah, but he's super sorry about that. And it's so interesting because you would think, like, because yes, periodically throughout the season, Caliban still showed his douchey ways, especially how he handled the whole Lilith thing, trying to kill her and her baby. Well, more so kill her baby, because he's like, yeah, the moment that's taken care of, he knows Lilith would just be done for and he can take her out, because the baby, which later on gets named Adam, which even before the baby got named, I was like, of course you're going to name it Adam, which, obviously, because obviously it's her Adam, specifically Wardwell's Adam she fell for, and not her own Adam, that being the whole thing. But, the moment, like, she was having the baby, I was like, it's going to be named Adam. But it's just, he didn't want to have any competition for the throne, because him being with Sabrina brought him closer to the throne. And if, I don't know whether he was hoping that, maybe if something happens to Sabrina, at the very least, he will have some authority, because I guess, like, if Lilith ever has a kid, Lilith having Adam would mean that Adam would eventually have more claim to the throne. I'm sure Lucifer would be more about having, like, a son on a throne than a daughter. maybe even, I don't know, but I just thought that was just my whole point for that was just it was just an interesting development. Like he is a little douchey throughout the season, but more often than not, he stays actually pretty loyal to Sabrina, even when like Spellman Sabrina ends up like convincing him using prudence to kind of convince him that basically he needs to chop off his balls for Hecate, like to be a part of their rituals and stuff like that, like the warlocks and the men in the coven have to do that, and he ultimately ends up doing it. I mean, granted, he's made of clay, but it was still like the gesture, the fact that he was willing to do it, shows you like, oh, like hey, he, you know, because regardless, he might not be able to die from it, but he still, you know, had to feel it, you know, snipping off his jewels like that, but still. It showed you that legit, and even stuff he does later on makes you go, you legitimately fell in love with Sabrina Morningstar, and I thought that was so interesting. I mean, having rewatched season 3, I mean, because I'd forgotten about it, it's like, oh yeah, because even there were definitely hints of him actually kind of being into her, but it's still like, it was more so like a power grab type of situation last season, but him still being interested in her. Just seeing him full blown actually being in love with her, you know, actually caring about her. But then again, it is that thing that makes you go, but then there's a small part of me that's like, but it seems like you're a little power hungry and you're just trying to grab the throne. So it takes away a little bit of some of that sentimentality that he has towards her, but you know, that's just me. There was actually a lot less Nick and Sabrina as I thought it would have been this season. I mean, granted, it becomes more of a thing in a later, like, half of the season. But in the beginning part, it was just obviously the more so him and Prudence. A little back and forth, but it was, obviously, they were on much better terms, like, near the end of last season. But, like, even there was that point where there was that little flirting back and forth, which I loved when they were in the alternate reality. We'll talk about, same reality, just everyone's memories of the war. But it's like, oh, he's like, who are you again? And she's like, I'm a friend. He's like, a hot friend. And it's just like, oh, he's like, but I could have handled more weight. And she's like, I bet you could have. And Rosalind's like, are you really flirting with your ex-boyfriend right now? And she's like, he doesn't even know who I am, so it doesn't even count. I love that whole bit. But like the back and forth between them, you know, it's small stuff, but it's never like, it's not as bad as it was. It got super bad last season between them when like he was talking mad shit and blowing up at her and she had to like snap back like, yo, don't get it twisted. Don't ever disrespect me like it. And obviously after she put him in his place after that last season, he kept, you know, he got his shit together, but still it just like there wasn't as many like Sabrina and Nick moments until, like I said, the second half of the season where, you know, things kind of changed for him. But, you know, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. You have the whole Theo and Robin situation, their relationship being pretty solid. Obviously, like a wrench kind of gets thrown into. I didn't know where they were going to go with that when they introduced it was like, yeah, this is my friend. It's like, I got to explain some stuff to you. I'm like, what's that about? And then she puts Theo to sleep, and like Robin's like, what the hell is that about? It's like, we got to go. I'm like, what's that about? You're keeping secrets, but it's like, it turns out like they were leaving the world because at that point, like, their mortal realm was basically turning terrible with everything going on. So the hobgoblins, in particular, they bring it up like the Fae and stuff like that are bouncing and going to go to their realm because they pretty much figured Earth was doomed. But I thought that was such an interesting moment because like they start introducing like, oh, because like at this point in time, like Robin was the only hobgoblin we met. So now, you know, hearing a little bit more about the Fae and kind of fairy folk, it was kind of interesting. I think this is the first, once again, I haven't rewatched part 1 or 2 in a while, and I've only seen each season. I've seen those 2 seasons twice, but it's been a while. So I don't think there's anything that came up before now that was in that same regard, at least not that I'm aware of, as like a hobgoblin, like I say, Fae or fairy folk like that, but I just thought that was such an interesting development. Even his friend bringing up the fact is Robin staying in this place is actually bad because it's making him lose more and more of who he is. Which that turns into a whole thing because obviously Theo is like to protect the person that she loves, to allow him to keep everything that makes Robin special. I have to let him go, you know. And it's like obviously Robin didn't want to go, even suggesting that Theo left with him. And it's like, but Theo's like, I've got too much here, my friends, my family, school, like, you know, his entire life is here, you know. So it lends itself to that very, you know, complicated thing. There is this moment later on, which is like, once again, I don't know if I talked about it enough last season. We definitely see more of it this season because we only got peeks at it here and there in season 3, but that hobgoblin speed is just so dope, especially when he went to like open that safe and you're seeing, and I like how they did the camera angle of like, it's like the camera's on the dial and it's like as it's turning, like it's looking at, it's just like, it's, I guess from a cinematography standpoint, I like that. I'm not one of those like behind the scenes nerds. I'm like, oh, how they film certain things. When stuff like that happens, I'm just like, oh, I just like from the cinematography standpoint, I did like that, just like how they like filmed that. But I also love that he's like doing it really fast, and later on it's like Sabrina's like, what took you so long? He's like, there was like 8 million combinations, and he showed his hands and they were like kind of red. It's like, oh, that was it's just speedster stuff. I've, like I said, over the years, I've gained a much better appreciation for speedster, so I just thought that was interesting. But I did like that, despite, like, I was like, oh man, thing's going to end there. Like, I didn't expect us to see Robin, but then later on he pops up with the Battle of the Bands storyline, and oh, we got him back, and he decided, Theo was like, I made a mistake, but like, could you stay? And he was like, that's all I wanted to hear you say, so I was like, okay, that worked out. I mean, because to be fair, he doesn't really have any family. The only family he had were the pagans, so he has friends who are hobgoblins, sure, but I guess it's like, we got into it a little. I don't know if there were more of the show, or that's a whole conversation. I'm going to say that to like the very, very end. But I'm wondering, would that have been something we would have dived in more with his character going forward or not? If they would have really dabbled in that, I don't know. And also what that really meant, because I guess he'd eventually become more and more human, which I think because we don't know what a hobgoblin's lifespan is like, so maybe that benefits, because it makes him more human, so that means him and Theo could, grow old and die together, if things, work out that way, of them kind of living a life together and stay together, I was really surprised with the revelation that Roz was a witch. I thought that was so interesting, especially because, like, obviously we built, like, her character's been built up, like, over the, in season 1 of, like, oh yeah, like, her family got cursed by witches or something like that. The moment, like, Marie took an interest, Mambo Marie took an interest in her, I was like, oh, are you going to be revealed to be the witches that cursed her family or something like that? But it's like, no, she was like, oh, actually, you're not, it's not no cunning or curse that you have. You're a witch. I was like, yo, especially because they did something interesting this season they've never done before. She was basically able to share her cunning, her visions with someone. Like, basically after her and Harvey did the dirty deed, he was able to kind of sleep draw everything. So she was able to kind of pass her visions onto him. So I guess maybe because of how intimate the emotions are between them and, her power, she's in such a relaxed state that it kind of flowed into, I guess because it was so fresh in her mind because of everything, it flowed through Harvey. But I just thought that was so interesting, that because it never pops up again over the season. I mean, it served the one purpose that it needed to, I guess, because of the grand scheme of everything that was going on. That was kind of the main focus, but it never came up again, at least that we were aware of. So I just thought that was so interesting, just to kind of introduce things on 2 different fronts like that. I mean, because also, like, it's also interesting too, because for Roz, there was a little bit of contention she had towards Sabrina, because she had even asked, like, was Sabrina part of the family that cursed us? And, there's a whole thing about her going blind. I guess that's just a natural part of them being witches. It's not like that's part of the curse. I guess, like, them being witches, it just meant that, I guess it's kind of the price to pay for having that ability. I think it's more so like probably like when you lose that sight, your worldly sight kind of expands with the power of a seer. I guess that's all that is. So that was kind of interesting because there's still the storyline, because let's not forget Roz was actually going blind, but it was interesting that her grandma had hid that from her. But it's like, oh yeah, because it's like, well, we kind of had to make some excuse up, be like, oh, we were cursed by witches, because they couldn't exactly admit, like, oh, like, especially in a God-fearing time and them being a God-fearing family, there's no way we can admit, hey, we're witches just for us to end up dead. It's like, no. So I thought that was such an interesting development. I even thought it was interesting how Harvey reacted to it, because he was kind of pissed at first. I'm like, is that something really to be pissed about? Because at least she's being upfront about it. Granted, you had to find out, like, later on in complicated way about Sabrina being. To be fair, could they bring it up this season too? Like, could we get a peek at it again? Like, when Sabrina initially confessed to him and then wiped his memory. It's like, all right, Harvey didn't handle the whole thing, you being a witch. I mean, granted, the later circumstances, understandably so, complicated that, but it's like, initially it's like, oh, like, he didn't handle that news well. So I guess it only makes sense that he wouldn't handle the news well that Roz, because also for him it's like, which is interesting considering, like, all that they do that's connected to magic, that he holds such a resentment towards it. That, you think, I mean, granted, it's taken a lot from him. I mean, he blames magic for his brother and just, magic can also be, bad and turn nasty. So I get like why he would understandably be resentful towards it, but I think it's so interesting because like he's been around Sabrina and so many other witches and warlocks since then, so it seemed like he was chill with it. But finding out Roz was one, it complicated things because I guess for him it just made him think back to like things between him and Sabrina and just how complicated magic made their relationship. He was kind of, I guess, scared and worried that the same thing was going to happen between him and Roz, but luckily they worked that out very through very complicated means. But I also liked how they made Roz, her Prudence and Mambo Marie became like the Weird Sisters, the new Weird Sisters, as they became sentinels, kind of keeping an eye on all the eldritch terrors and everything, trying to keep an eye on all the realms and stuff like that. I thought that was so fascinating to make that. I mean, granted, they kind of they changed. I'm going ahead and talk about it, but I thought it was interesting because at the end of it, Agatha is sane again, so that means the new Weird Sisters are Prudence, Roz, and Agatha, which I think that's so interesting because we get one instance of it when she's trying to read Blackwood's mind at the end of the series. So we got one instance of that, but I'm assuming we're going to see a lot more of that because we didn't get it this season. But like that means well, we got it a little bit because Roz was like doing her duties as a sentinel, but I'm assuming going forward, she'd kind of do the Sabrina thing where she would balance between going to the academy and Baxter High, which I just thought that was such an interesting development on her character. Especially because you actually think about the fact that her dad is very God-fearing. So for him to, have to balance that with like being a witch with your dad and everything, that's got to be even more complicated. We never touched on that storyline, but that could have obviously been something potentially done in the future, just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. But I just thought that was so interesting, like the Weird Sister development. I mean, granted, it makes sense, no Dorcas, sadly. Obviously, I keep bringing them up, so let's finally dive into the Eldritch Terrors. It's actually kind of interesting. Blackwood is on some pagan shit because, like, obviously the pagans last season, everything with the Green Man, it's like you're gonna we didn't see them like decades later when it was all said and done. Who knows if they got killed off later on, or because the only thing we saw were like the plant zombie people. So either the pagans had moved on or died off at some point in time, but it's like, you're pretty much killing everyone. I mean, granted, they wanted to kill themselves if it meant making the world in the image of the Green Man, blah, blah, blah. It makes sense for them, but it's like, it's just that madman mentality of like, hey, I'm going to, mad person mentality of just like, hey, even if I have to die, I'm going to do this thing. Like, the fact of the matter is, summoning the Eldritch Terrors, Blackwood was going to literally die like everyone else. It wasn't going to benefit him. But I guess he thought, like, because I summoned them, they're going to bend a little to my will. I'll serve them. Or in some cases, he's like, later on, like, oh, no, they'll serve for me. But it's like, I mean, to be fair, he's out of his damn mind. As I actually saw in the future, well, that alternate future, he was definitely out of his mind, having lived so long and stuff like that. So it's no surprise. He's kind of been a madman walking since part 3. I mean, he's always kind of been one, but still. But breaking down the Eldritch Terrors, I like the fact is, I thought was interesting, they revealed that Darkness is personified as a lady because, what was it, number 2, which was the Uninvited, was like, oh, hey, my sister, Darkness. I thought it was interesting because, like, this is the second thing I've ever seen that personified Darkness as a lady. The first being Supernatural. God's sister was Darkness, Amara. So I just thought that was just kind of interesting. Speaking of the Uninvited, they never took note of this. Isn't that the same lady that Sabrina and Roz saved her daughter last season? Because wasn't that little girl's name Lucy? That was the same little girl, wasn't it? I mean, maybe I'm being crazy. At first I was like, because they did not mention it at all in the episode. So I was like, was that not the same person? I could have sworn that was the same. It looked like it might have been the same mom, but maybe because her hair was different, I wasn't sure. But it looked like that was the same girl, especially having just rewatched season 3. But hell, I could be 100% wrong. Lucy being the girl they saved from Jimmy Platt, the ice cream dude. I thought that was her, but they, like I said, they never made note of it. Like, we saw her body. I guess because of the nature of the show, they'd be like, it'd probably be a little too dark. Because the show's like, what, TV 14? It's like, it'd probably be too dark to show, like, a kid's dead body or even reference that. You'd probably like, that'd be crossing the line. So they never even referenced it. So I don't know. I would assume the Uninvited ripped out her heart too, but maybe he didn't. that was a whole interesting development. But like, I mean, especially later on when you understand why he does his thing of doing that, because he was he was there at the beginning when like mankind was first gathered around fire, and he wasn't invited. So that was it. And then eventually he joined with the other terrorists because they invited him to sit amongst them, which is like interesting. So basically you were denied. And because of that, anytime people deny you, you rip their heart out, which is interesting, the parallels, because obviously Sabrina was going through a little heartbreak at the same time. So loneliness and stuff like that. So also, I love how they just super casually killed off Dorian. It's like, he's always just been in the background and just kind of doing douchey things. And it's like, well, see here. Oh, Dorian's dead. I thought he was immortal. Yeah, he's immortal, just not invincible. Oh, and that's the end of it. It's like, oh, poor Dorian. Because that was like, what, episode 2? Because I even liked how, I was wondering if they were actually going to do that. Because they mentioned, it's like, oh, there's 8 terrors. I'm like, wait, there's 8 episodes this season. I had to check to make sure. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's definitely 8 episodes. I'm like, are we going to get like 1 episode? Kind of, sort of, it works out like that. But kind of, sort of. But regardless, most of the season is kind of like that. So I just thought that was kind of fascinating in its own right. Regardless, going to the third one being Weird, which I thought was kind of an interesting name. I even love that whole thing with that dude Lucas, because it's like, oh, I'm going to be the we need a Trojan horse. And at first she was making like a boyfriend that was made, it's like, oh, supposed to be sensitive like kind like Harvey, but also kind of a bit of a bad boy like Nick, kind of the best of both worlds. But I thought like, oh, the moment she started making it, it's like, of course that thing's going to get in a drain, and the moment you make your perfect boyfriend, it's going to get infected by the weird. I thought, but I didn't realize that it was going to take such a long amount of time, but I thought eventually it'd get to it. But then we got introduced to Lucas, and in her dream sequence or whatever, it seemed like it was him, but then when in actuality, it turned out it wasn't him, which I was confused by. So I guess at some point it just naturally just snuck in and got inside of Sabrina, because that ends up being the reveal to it. I guess it just manifested itself as Lucas in her dream, just because it made it a little easier. It's like, oh, if I'm a little easy on the eyes, and you're in a vulnerable spot, and me being kind of a handsome kid, or whatever, make it just a little easier for me to get a little control of you. Maybe that's what it is. I also love that when it's all said and done, like they're like, yeah, he transferred to Riverdale High. I was like, Jesus. That's funny. Will they reference that? I don't know. Because I should also note, like, once again, they do that thing where, like, they bring in actors from others, like, even Riverdale stuff. I thought was interesting. Because later on during that the band's Battle of the Bands situation, the Stone, was it Philosophers or whatever their faces names it? Those are 3 of the people from Stone Prep on Riverdale. Those were, like, 3 of the main, like, people that Jughead and Betty and Archie and them dealt with, which I found so fascinating. I was like, oh, because they do it. Like, because I even referenced it, like the actress who played Penelope, Cheryl's mom in Riverdale, she was literally, that's who Prudence disguised herself as when her and Ambrose were going after her dad last season. So it's like these little one-off moments that they have, and I thought that was so interesting. I was like, oh, what his character's, the home dude's name was like, it's like, what? I forgot, was it like Toby or something like that? And like, obviously it's like Brett in Riverdale. So I just thought like, they definitely do that on purpose. But I was like, that's so fascinating that they did that. That was an interesting development with the Battle of the Bands, just because it introduced like the fact is that Lucifer had presented himself to Harvey's dad in the past, which is interesting because when he was younger, I was about to call him Archie. Harvey ran into Lucifer in the mines. So I think it's so interesting that like the Kinkle families had a connection to Lucifer in more ways than one. It wasn't just Sabrina being in, Harvey's life that did that. It's like, no, it's just interesting. Like there's been that connection already. Just thought that was an interesting element to it. Number 4, I went on a super huge tangent. I do apologize. 4 being the alternate world, which I thought that was kind of interesting. Basically back, and that's what I found so fascinating too. Is like, how can you make a world where you're hunting down witches and stuff like that? You're a warlock. Obviously, Sabrina being enemy number 1. To me, one thing I really thought was interesting is obviously Sabrina being Samantha, the glasses and the brunette hair. I was like, oh, that's so interesting, because I think the actress Kiernan Shipka, the actress who plays Sabrina, is naturally a brunette. So I think it was interesting. Like, so for the first time, probably in the show, she hasn't had to wear like the platinum blonde wig that she's kind of had to wear for such a long time. Well, the blonde wig at first, and then the platinum blonde that she is now, platinum blonde / white. So it's just interesting. I was like, oh, you just get to just have your own hair out. I'm only basing that because I've seen like one interview with her where she had brown hair, so I was under the assumption, because I think she even answered. That like, yeah, it's a wig that she has to wear for the show and stuff like that. It catches me off guard because I was like, oh, it's so weird because I'm just so used to you having the hair you do as Sabrina. I mean, granted, she only had like the blonde hair for like most of season 1, but obviously season 2, 3, and now this, she's had the plot. It's so stuck in your own head because it's what you've seen more often than not, you know. So it's just one of those things. I mean, it's kind of like it's the same thing with Rose McIver. From iZombie, because I'm so used to seeing her as Liv. It's so weird to see her in real life with like blonde hair, because I'm so used to seeing her with like white hair as Liv. So it's that exact same thing, which interestingly enough, that also introduced an element that we never got a damn answer to the entire series. I'm like, well, the entire season, because he pops up like twice. He pops up this episode and he pops up in episode 8. And I'm like, who the hell is this trinket dude? Why are we not finding out who the hell this dude is and why he has all these objects? He has Pandora's box. He has a freaking imp, which ended up being the 4th terror. But I was like, why are we not asking this dude who the hell he is? He's super casual, like, oh, I'm the trinket guy. I'm like, give me some damn answers. Who the hell are you, bro? Like, we never got any answers to that. I was like, that's so weird. You just pop up twice and you just happen to be heavily connected and a very important part to all this stuff that's going down. But regardless, I wonder if that an element that would have gotten played with more in the future, or was that always going to be the plan to give us that look? I feel like that definitely had to have grown into something more later on, but who knows? I could be mistaken. But what I thought was an interesting element was like how the alternate world was only like within the confines of Greendale. And I thought was interesting what the Trinket Man said. He's like, well, the imp is still an imp. So I guess it's kind of like that genie / djinn thing where it's like you have to be very careful about your wish because there's always loopholes and technicalities. And it's like, oh, you want to be in control. It's like, but to be a little sly and funny, the imp made it so his reach only goes as far as the Greendale border. Because the moment you cross over, like Ambrose does, and eventually, Robin, which I didn't talk about it earlier. It sounds like his name is Puck, which I'm like, that sounds familiar mythology-wise. I think I know what that is. I think I'm familiar. Isn't he a famous particular hobgoblin or something? And like I said, could be reading too much into it. But at the moment, it's like his friend called him Puck. I was like, I definitely have heard that name before in mythology. I might be confusing it with different mythology for all I know. But regardless, then them going on the outskirts, they were able to remember, but obviously going back in. Also, it reminds me of Once Upon a Time, because there was a storyline where, I won't go into it, but there was a Once Upon a Time storyline where a similar thing kind of happened. But I just thought that was so fascinating. Also, like, drinking the soup to get your memories back. I even loved, it was actually kind of an interesting thing, because Agatha was mad before that world got recreated. It basically made her sane again, which I thought was an interesting development. A world of madness cleared some of that insanity and made her sane again. Granted, when it was all undone, I was almost worried that, I mean, it seems like the only people who remembered at the end of the day were Roz and Sabrina. And I liked the development on why they did too, because I was like, why are you the only ones that are affected? I was like, was it just witches? It's like, no, witches are affected too, like, because Aunt Zelda and Hilda don't remember you. But then it's like, oh, it turns out it's because they had direct correlate connections, because Roz had touched the uninvited, or rather, he touched her and she saw everything. And then you had Sabrina being infected by the weird. And so because of that, they had, as they labeled it, an immunization to all the others. So that's why the alternate world didn't affect them. I thought that was so interesting. Interesting develop, because I was wondering, like, I was like, why is, I was like, oh, my name, they referenced it, kind of making it like a flu shot. I thought that was fascinating. Then you had the fifth Terror, which ended up being was it the Cosmos? That was interesting because that ended up bringing the Sabrinas together again, which I thought was kind of interesting because like the moment like Lucifer had kicked Sabrina Spellman out of hell, it's like, oh, you're my false daughter, never come here again. I just thought that was so interesting because I just assumed like, I was like, wait, are we just never going to, I was like, are they just going to live their two separate lives and it never being a thing? It's like, oh, of course it's going to be a thing because it's a cosmic problem on many different fronts. I mean, to be fair, it benefited them on some occasions because of the two Sabrina things, they were able to deal with the darkness. Because that's also like that whole thing made that interesting too, because it's like, especially when Sabrina kind of had no one, at least Sabrina Spellman kind of had no one. At the very least, it's like, oh, we're very secret best friends because they had each other. It's like, oh yeah, she went on those dates with Carl and Melvin, and it was like, oh, let me tell Sabrina about it, you know. So it was when she kind of felt like she didn't have anyone, at least because this was someone that understood, because it's something only they knew about. I mean, granted, Ambrose knew, and eventually other people slowly found out, but still. And even that being an interesting thing when it's like, well, you know, Sabrina Spellman being like, oh, ironically, I was actually coming here to tell you the truth myself. It's like, who else knew? It's like, well, I don't want to tell it because I don't want anyone else to get in trouble. Zelda's screaming for Ambrose to show up. She's like, but it's me that convinced him to keep quiet. It's like, oh yes, because a 16-year-old girl is able to stop a 131-year-old man from doing whatever he wants. And is that what happened, Ambrose? Did she bully you? And Ambrose just stands there speechless because it's like, man, when Aunt Zelda wants to lean into you, she leans in, dude. I just thought that was interesting. But obviously, like, the whole thing about how they're going to handle this, because then we got introduced to Metatron, which is also interesting just because I only know about Metatron because of Supernatural as well. We don't know it's kind of a similar thing where Metatron, I guess, once again, I'm not well versed in the Bible and stuff like that, but I guess Metatron's always like the right hand to God. Which I even love the moment like Lucifer's like, the false God's going to get involved. Oh, I always hate it when he does that. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. I might have mentioned it. I know I was thinking about it. I don't remember if I mentioned it in the earlier parts of this recording, but Lucifer was super jokey this season. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. These recordings are actually spread apart. But it's just like, he was obviously super menacing season 1, especially in season 1 because he wasn't in a human form. He was his goat form the entire time. But obviously he was always up to some shit. It's like this season he was super jokey. Even when that whole situation with it's like, oh, why are you letting Caliban marry your daughter? It's like, well, because he's made of clay, he won't pollute our bloodline. Because, to a certain extent, like, Sabrina being half mortal, half celestial, she's already kind of polluted. Don't want it to turn into a Gohan to Pan situation for all my DBZ people out there. Well, I guess technically DBGT. Regardless, you get what I'm trying. Well, no, because Pan pops up at the end of Z. Right? Yeah, because she's like what, 4 at the end of Z, maybe, I think, if I remember. I'm going on a tangent, huge tangent, doesn't matter. But it's also like, he's like, yeah, plus when he takes his shirt off, and I was like, what? That's just the stuff that he said. Now that I'm thinking about it in retrospect, I did bring it up earlier, at least parts of it, I believe. Like I said, I do apologize. These recordings are actually kind of hours apart in certain regards, but getting back to it, Metatron showing up, because I thought that was interesting too, because it's like, we've not touched the celestial, more angel heaven side of things since season 2, and that was only when those 3 angels showed up. We haven't tackled it since then. Or to be fair, there was that angel last season, they were trying to get some angel blood, to repair the coven to get back their powers, but obviously that didn't work out, mainly because of Dorian. Which I guess is almost... he's kind of screwed them over in certain regards, so I guess it was almost kind of like, you got yours by getting your heart ripped out earlier in the season. But nevertheless, so it was interesting, but even then it's only tackled in that one thing of, oh, Metatron's here, and so like we have to either kill one of the Sabrinas or merge them together, because this is the only way to restore some form of balance, because all the world, the infernal world and the mortal world are merging together, and stuff from hell is popping up on Earth, and stuff on Earth is popping up in hell. So we got to fix this. So only way it's, you have Sabrina and Nick finally getting together, which I also love Nick showing up at her school. He's got stuff transferred, and then Billy walks by. He's like, yeah, see you later, Nick. And he's like, good guy, Billy. And just acting like it's so nothing. It's just like, also shows you how good Nick is at just implanting himself in places. I wish we could have actually gotten more of her, more of him spending time, because he wanted to get to know both sides of her. He's always known the witch side, but the human side of her, he's never really gotten to know. Because he never really spent time in that part of her world. And I love her, like, all right, calm down, Ariel. I love that she went there too when he said to be a part of your world. But I wish we could have had an opportunity to spend more time with him. Because, it's actually interesting because there was an episode, wasn't that in season 1? Where, she invited, Prudence and them to Baxter High to kind of live as more. I think so, or at least might have just been Prudence. I could have sworn it was Agatha and Dorcas as well. Obviously, but I can't remember it now. But it was kind of something of the similar vein. So I just thought that was just kind of fascinating, kind of similar in that regard. It would have been nice to be able to get more than one episode with it. I mean, it was only a fraction of an episode before all the cosmic stuff went down. But Nick and Sabrina kind of getting together because it's we don't know how this is going to end up, because if they combine together, what could happen, Sabrina Spellman could disappear, Sabrina Morningstar could disappear, or they could both disappear. No one knows what this merge thing was going to happen. And it would have been interesting to find out what would have happened, who would have came out on top. Like I said, I even love that little bit between Zelda being well, obviously Sabrina Morningstar is the weaker, and it's whoa, and Zelda, don't say that. And it's that's not true. And then Lucifer being exactly right. Sabrina Spellman's the weaker one. He said something else, and she's Sabrina Spellman's excuse me, and then Sabrina Morningstar's stop it, Dad. It's just like I said, it's just those dad moments he had this season. I was just kind of it's so weird that you were the bad, scared. You were the thing that everyone was scared of, and you manipulate and killed and hurt so many people, and it's just for you to be all jokey this season. I mean, he had his moments, but still he was mainly all jokes this season, which was kind of so surprising to turn the main villain into something else like that. I think that's so fascinating. But Sabrina's Morningstar spending the time with the others as they, as Fright Club, because it's something she'd never done before. Didn't want to tell the others what was going on. I don't know if they never actually found out about there being another Sabrina. Probably not till later, but they never made a story point of them finding out. Obviously, everyone else did. So I guess it's just one of those in-between things they found out, but they never made a point of it, when everyone else ended up discovering this fact. But nevertheless, then them also killing Metatron, I thought that was interesting. Also, no ramifications for that. I mean, to be fair, there was no ramification for killing the two angels back in season 2, and draining the third one of his blood last season. There was no issues with that. So I just thought that was kind of fascinating in the long run. But now it's a situation of okay, because of everything, the craziness of the cosmos, this being one of the terrors, basically a copy of these 3 realms, a rogue copy of these 3 realms was kind of flying towards him and was going to collapse upon everything. So one of the Sabrinas threw a rock, paper, scissors, and it ended up being Morningstar, had to go through to the other world to kind of appease the balance. And I thought it was so interesting the moment she went through, she ended up what I believe to be because I like that, it's just a stinger on her side of the episode in that particular episode, but it was just her landing there and being there with OG Aunt Zelda and Hilda from the original Sabrina series, which I thought was so interesting. I'd actually seen a clip online. I think it's actually on the Netflix YouTube channel. There was a clip of that. I didn't watch it, but the thumbnail shows them, so I knew they were in this. I just didn't know under what capacity. What I also love, I'll probably circle back to it, I'll circle to it. But I like that. I was surprised because episode 7 we got so much more of them, because I was like, oh, I thought that thing in episode 5 was all we were going to get. It's no, we got even more of them in episode 7. Now, that took me by surprise. I thought it was especially because when Sabrina lands there, it's oh, you hear the laugh track and everything. I was So, like, in this world, you've replaced Melissa Joan Hart's Sabrina to be the Sabrina of that world. That's what I didn't. Obviously, episode 7 gets more into that. I'll go ahead and jump to it because I thought it was so interesting how that situation was handled. And so, and it was so weird because it's a meta episode in an even larger scale, because it's not like, oh, these are the actors playing these characters on a sitcom. No, these are the characters playing the characters on a sitcom. So like Harvey is literally playing Harvey, but then it's just like, oh, but Roz, because it's been so long since I've seen the original series, I feel like they were kind of playing a little bit into the characters they were. Like, I feel like Roz she kind of felt a little bit like the Roz from the original show, but like I said, it's been years, so I can't, but because if I remember correctly, Harvey was kind of an airhead, and I think he was like, and this Harvey was like, yeah, how am I going to handle this situation? Oh, I should do some push-ups, like, because I think Harvey was kind of an idiot in the original show. I could be mistaken, so it felt like they were playing into that a little bit. Obviously, with the Aunt Hilda and Zelda, that was there. I also love that the Aunt Hilda and Zelda of this show, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, are the stand-ins, and I'm like, wait, what? I was so, maybe because of scheduling or whatever, I wish they could have gotten like Melissa Joan Hart. I never looked into it. I didn't think I saw her name, but part of me was wondering, like, because she had voiced the Void or something like that, but I don't think she did. Like I said, it could be mistaken. I didn't see anything saying that, and it didn't necessarily sound like her, but I was kind of bummed we didn't get, like, more of the cast, because there's actually, speaking of on the Netflix YouTube channel, there's actually a video of, like, Melissa Joan Hart, the actor who played Harvey, and the two, Aunt Hilda and Aunt Zelda from the original show, reacting to like parts of the first episode of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which I thought was pretty dope. Obviously, it's like the contrast. Obviously, it's kind of even wild for them because it's obviously very, very different from the show they did way back in the day. So I just thought just kind of an interesting tidbit. If you haven't seen it, it's really fascinating, kind of getting their perspective on it and everything. But talking about that, we have Salem, and even Sabrina getting caught off guard, like, wait, it's a talking stuffed cat, because she wasn't expecting it, which I think is so funny. It's so funny because obviously Salem does talk, but obviously he doesn't talk like he does in the original show. He doesn't talk in human words. He just meows that everyone just understands. So him to actually be talking like him is like, wait, what? And he's the #1 star. And part of me was wondering, is that supposed to be like a joke because he kind of was the star of the show, and he was the one that everyone just like, I guess he was kind of like maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just like, because it's even like, yeah, that's why, because he ends up being the head writer, and that's why, well, don't you wonder why I always got like the best lines in the episodes and stuff? It was just a weird episode that I really dug, because I was like, this is so weird. Ends up being one of the saddest damn episodes in this season, just because like literally everyone in that world is dead, like, because obviously Sabrina tried to bring in Prudence and Agatha, they ended up, then like all her friends, Theo, Roz, Harvey, her Aunt Z, and Hilda, things not working out in that regard. That was just such a bummer, because she wanted to, I would have been so dope if she was able to kind of bring everybody over into this world, and that would have probably led to complications, so for her to be the only one that survived. I even loved, the reveal that, Salem is actually, the Endless, and it likes to make this whole thing in this enjoyment. It's got Ambrose in the green room grinding up people for food. It's like, that was bloody and gnarly. Hell, even Ambrose didn't make it. It was just a bummer that she's the only one that made it through. And even when she made it through, she ended up dying. I was like, that is like the most depressing ass thing, because all the other beings in that world got sucked up, because the Endless was thinking me and the Void, we go hand in hand, so I'm going to be fine. It's like, no, the Void is going to suck you up too. You're not as invincible as you think you are. I was kind of hoping when she goes through that the cat would still be talking, but it turns out that's not the case. I think the Endless got completely sucked up as they were going through, but damn, dude, that was just kind of a bummer. Everyone died pretty brutally too. Nick being the one that ended up killing everyone, because he's like, I told you, I'm not Nick, I'm Harvey, and that was just kind of a twisted situation. But it was just a weird meta episode. But even meta wise, it went places that you're like, man, it was just a weird weird episode. And I was just so surprised when we got that for episode 7, because I'm like, this is episode 7. I was like, there's only going to be one episode left. So how's this all going to play out? I thought we'd have, Sabrina Morningstar back with them and everything would work out. It's like, nope, they killed her off. And it's like, jeez. Now Sabrina goes up against the Void. I don't know why, but the way that was structured, it made me and I think elements of episode 8, but also like 7 gave me Legion vibes. The TV show Legion, X-Men TV show Legion. It kind of heavily, I don't know what it was. It was just like the structure of it and just how it was represented. I was like, got some very because Legion could be very weird and meta-y in certain episodes, and just kind of just a strange show. So I definitely got those vibes in 7 and 8, which is especially the Void stuff. It's that definitely felt a little Legion-esque. But like I said, also episode 7. But regardless, Sabrina trying to sacrifice herself, family finding out, trying to stop her, her losing, leaving the box there, getting most of the Void locked up, but having her soul put in Sabrina Morningstar, because that's got to be complicated in its own right. Having a base, you already had to say goodbye to yourself, and then have yourself die in your arms. This is like your best friend. It's like you lost a literal part of yourself in this regard, because she died trying to get back to warn you about the Void and everything. Especially because Sabrina blames herself, because she's like, I'm the one that didn't follow the script. I was supposed to complete the time loop. I broke it. I threw everything into chaos. She's like, everyone tries to tell me it isn't my fault. At the end of the day, it is, and that's what I talked about earlier too. It's like, this is probably one of the first times she's ever fully outright taken responsibility for everything kind of being on her. To be fair, there is truth in everything of this is actually on Father Blackwood, because he's the one that summoned the terror. So it's it's on him that, even when the bastard got decapitated, Prudence was stabbing him with needles, to give him some phantom pains. Bastard still ended up putting himself back together and causing a hell of a lot of troubles. It's because I kind of had skipped over it, the return episode where the dead had returned. That was a complicated thing, especially for Sabrina, her dad saying all those vile things. It's I don't think he meant that, but I mean, you never know, because even Sabrina's I was only 2 months old when he died, and especially considering the circumstances of my birth, he maybe things would have changed over the years, or who knows, given those 16 years, he could have grown to resent Sabrina, because she'd be a constant reminder of oh, you're not my child, you're the Dark Lord's daughter, so there's that. Dr. C, which I didn't talk about it. I love the whole incubus leaving him thing, especially at Hilda's wedding, and it literally bounces from Theo to Robin to Harvey, I think. Just how it was bouncing from different people like that, I thought was so interesting. But also his mom, she made a comment about and that's why I had to kill all his exes, and I was like, kind of implying he has a type that he kind of hooked up with witches or something, or people of the supernatural world or something like that. But she said something about oh, I killed him, and no one said anything about it. I was like, oh, I guess she was saying that jokingly, oh, I'm the scary mother. It's oh, and then she proceeded to try and actually kill Hilda. I even love Dr. C being yeah, I kind of wish she was dead again right now. I was like, Jesus. There's the whole Dorcas thing that was sad too. Prudence trying to calm her down and being I don't want to go, and it's but we'll reunite. We'll see each other again soon. Dorcas telling Agatha she forgives her, and that actually brings Agatha back from her insanity. And Agatha being why did she say something like that? Because obviously her mind, she's only remembering. She had some vague notions of what was going on, but it seems her last memories are when, the god Pan drove her insane last season. It seems those are mostly where her memories are kind of intact. It was that's a shame to have that all kind of dropped on you like that. And, even Prudence, having to say, being reunited with her sister just to kind of lose her again. All three of them being together like that, What I thought was well, for one, there's the Lazarus versus Mambo Marie situation. I was like, okay. I was thinking, I actually liked that they made it so that she actually was about to lose the game if Lilith had stepped in. So I thought that was fascinating. But also the fact is that Marie's getting her who she really is getting revealed. Her being Baron Samandi, and I was like, oh shit, that's interesting. And obviously Zelda didn't take that well at first because it's like, oh, the person I've fallen for isn't who I think. Because everyone else had kind of, at least, Sabrina and Hilda had kind of hinted to like, oh, they kind of knew what her circumstances were. Because obviously this has been a rough season on many different regards for Zelda too, because like obviously Hilda moved out to live with Dr. C, and it's like, oh, I can't find my paper or my lighter or my coffee, and then like Sabrina and Ambrose are looking, and it's like we see it, it's there, because it's probably been forever, because that's been a constant through line to Zelda's, like, yeah, she can be very harsh and she can push Hilda away, but she's very lost without her, especially when she was in that nightmare in season 1 where she thought like she killed Hilda and she wasn't coming back, like that broke her heart. She never really talked about it, but it's like there have been multiple instances of her feeling like she's lost without her sister, but she's too proud to actually admit it. I even love seeing her cry at Zelda. It's like, oh, just kiss the man already. It's like, because you never get to see her emotional like that. It's just because she's always very stoic. She tries to always keep her emotions in check, But regardless, huge tangent and all that. But it's like, I guess for her, it's like the first person. I mean, Faustus wasn't who she thought he was. So I think it's kind of a thing of like, oh, I found someone I connect and click with. And it's like, she was suspicious of her to begin with last season. But now it's like, oh, I should have been, because you're not who you claim to be. So what we have is kind of built on this lie. And now you're about to leave too. And at the end, she saw the Baron in their true form, and because Mambo Marie had given her, was it like, just shake these if you ever need me? What was it, those dice or something? She never did in this season, but I'm wondering, is that something that would come up later on to help with the whole Sabrina situation at the end of all of this? Like, I'm sure that, having the Baron on your side could probably help fix some, not necessarily fix that, but play some role in that. But maybe not. Just with the way everything ends at the very, very end makes you think, I don't know. But considering how Zelda and Hilda feel at the end, makes you think like they would have tried to find some way. But we'll get to that soon enough. Lilith's storyline was pretty damn tragic this season, too. I mean, I think her story ends up being pretty tragic all around anyway. I mean, it's kind of been tragic the entire show. I mean, obviously her past, but also just what we've seen in this show is very tragic as well. Just considering, like, the sad thing is, because she ends up giving birth to Adam, especially after Caliban and the King of Hell tried to. Did we ever find out whatever happened to Beelzebub? I don't think he ever got. Yeah, I think he was just kind of in the background. I don't think he ever died. I think like the last time we see him is at that table where Sabrina Morningstar is trying to like put stuff like how they should handle hell going forward, like, oh, one soul in, one soul out. Like, I think that's the last time we saw Beelzebub, because the other Asmodeus ended up getting killed by the Coven, which I didn't even talk about that, which I thought that was kind of interesting. Like, obviously, because them worshiping her Hecate this entire season, because obviously that's who they promised to praise at the end of season 3 when they were able to bring, with her help, able to bring Hilda back to life. Right, going back to it, her giving birth to Adam, just to lose him under those circumstances, because Lucifer's like, no, I'm gonna have my son. You're not gonna get any reprieve. Like I told you in a moment, my son was born. You're dead, but I'm also not gonna make you into a martyr to him. So, to make sure that Lucifer never got his hands on him, she basically cooked him. Did what he. And, obviously him being Adam, and that's what Lucifer did to her Adam, Wardwell's Adam, and for that that was just a mess up. Because part of me was almost thinking like, oh, please tell me she didn't actually do it, that she's psyching, because I was like, oh, you got to lie to the Prince of Lies. Then that's what I thought was going to happen there. I thought it was going to be revealed like, oh, she faked it up. It's like, no, she did it, because in her mind, it's like, I'd rather kill him than ever let you get your clutches on him. But he punishes Lilith by being like, oh, you're going to be a human, you're going to live forever, you're going to get sick and all this, but you're going to continue to live, you're going to grow old that way, that's how you're going to die, you're going to, it was his way to kind of punish her for what she did, obviously torturing herself for it. It was interesting, though, like how that all turns out at the end, though. Her stabbing and drinking Lucifer's blood, gaining those powers, and basically the punishment he had given to her, she'd given to him, but we never got to see like the resolution of that. I'm assuming she just straight up just takes the throne. I mean, there's no one else to take it. At that point, Caliban was kind of gone. Once again, we don't know where Beelzebub was, but if she took some of his powers, it's not like anything Beelzebub could do. I'm assuming Lucifer would just be forced to walk on Earth with no powers and stuff like that. Maybe. So I guess she kind of got the throne at the end of the day, but it's still kind of like, even then, it cost her so much to have the throne. That was always what she wanted, but it was like, wasn't even worth it in the end because it cost you that much. But it's like, because it did, that's all you have left. So what that meant for her character going forward would be really interesting to see what that meant for her, But, yeah, just the ending in general. Sabrina becoming part of the Void, which I think is always interesting when you have those moments where Sabrina becomes like super powerful, like obviously like nearing the, like what was it, episode like 7 of season 2, maybe even episode 6, where she was just kind of like, the wide eyes, the had that power she was tapping into in season 2. It was kind of similar to that, but obviously like she had become part of the Void, so she was making people just disappear. It was just because I thought it was so interesting, because I slowly over the episode you saw things disappearing one by one, and you were like, oh, the Void is still there, just slowly chipping away. But it didn't even cross my mind to think that she had been infected by the Void, and obviously Sabrina ended up leaving because she didn't want to hurt anyone else that she cared about. And so Blackwood finding her, training her, and then even more time passes, and she ends up sending Roz away. Obviously, like, they were infected and possessed, but she had sent Harvey's dad away. I was like, man, this seems like a depressing ass situation. But luckily, they were going to be able to save Sabrina and the whole taking down Blackwood situation. There's still other storyline elements that were kind of left open. Well, I'll go ahead and finish my thoughts about everything. Sabrina doing what she always, making this ultimate sacrifice, because once again, she believed it was on her, the reason when everything happened. And like I brought up earlier, I cried. Big old tears in my eyes. I could not help it. I was like, no, I was trying to fight it. Don't let the tears fall, but they fell. I was like, that was just like heartbreaking. Once again, I always talk about it. It's always an interesting thing when you like kill your main protagonist. I always think that's such an interesting move. It's because I never would have expected it for this show. I mean, granted, technically she died and got resurrected, and, when I was mentioning earlier when she got souped up in season 2, but it's like, this was like a permadeath situation. I wasn't expecting that. Because at the same time, they threw the rest of the terrors inside of the Void, so getting rid of all of that, sealing it all within Pandora's box. But it's still just heartbreaking, because it's even sadder, because I think what made it even sadder is like, oh, it's not just Sabrina Spellman that get buried, it's Sabrina Morningstar. It's like, because these two, they were our daughters, and it's just like, it's so heartbreaking for that story to end that way, because it's like, this seemed like that's a show where it's like you'd see like it all worked out in the end, but it's like, no, it didn't. But for Sabrina, it's like, I'm okay. Sabrina Morningstar sacrificed herself. It's like, it's only fair that I sacrifice myself, because she believes I'm the cause of all of this. And I guess Sabrina probably could take it even further back by being like, sadly, some of the stuff her dad said to her, being like, oh, like, I wished I could, he wished she had never been born, because, the circumstances around her birth and everything. But it's like, it's a hard thing, you know, all these people around her, you know, even her saying her goodbyes to everybody. It's like, oh my God, you know, because she'd even, cause I don't think we ever found out what she wrote in that letter, did we? The letter she had originally written, maybe she gotten rid of it, but the letter she originally wrote when she was going to the void in the first place. I don't know if they never circled back to that. So I'm sure if you go back, you could probably just, because I think it is legible enough for you to just to pause it and read it. I just didn't, because I thought someone later on would read it, but it never came up. But it is sad, you know, for Zelda and Hilda to, you know, lose her, because she was a daughter to them. Even to the point Hilda's like, I'm gonna move back in, and Zelda's like, I appreciate it, but for her it's like, Hecate didn't save Sabrina. It was like, this wasn't her time. Like, why didn't the mother step in? You know, it was too soon for her to go. That, you know, that for them to have their child taken from them like that, you know. And then we see her kind of in the afterlife, and then Nick's with her, and it's like, well, Nick, he's like, yeah, some like undertow took him, like, you know, the waters of sorrow or something like that. And she's like, Nick, and he's like, it's okay, I'm with you here now. So it's like he wasn't in the right state of mind. It's just like, I guess he didn't want to be separated from Sabrina. I was kind of hoping they kind of did, spoilers, a supernatural thing where it's like he got told the rest of his life and now he's with Sabrina, but it doesn't seem like that. But it is that thing where you're like, there is this beautifulness to it where it's sad, but at the same time you're like, kind of similar to Supernatural, where it's like, hey, at the end of the day, she could eventually get reunited when everyone else eventually passes on. Well, because you also can't forget there was that, I mean, to be fair, she kind of changed everything, but what Zelda saw in her dream near the end of last season, of Sabrina returning and, you know, for an old Aunt Zelda to be there, you know, and everyone gathered around, you know, saying their goodbyes. But yeah, it's a complete ending in certain regards, because I'd seen some stuff suggesting this. I haven't read too much into it, but this is the final season of the show because Netflix isn't continuing it. But the creators of it, I think, said that they plan to continue. This isn't the end of this story because they're planning to continue it in a comic book. Similar to how Smallville, there is actually an 11th season of Smallville, but it's in the form of a comic book. So I think it's going to be something in a similar vein. I mean, obviously there's a lot of storylines left open, just like what I mentioned before. So that might be some bringing Sabrina back. Like I said, that might have something to do with Mambo Marie, or rather Baron Samandi. So have something to do with that. You know, maybe Zelda is so obsessed with bringing her back. Obviously, once again, where Lucifer ended up on Earth, Lilith running hell, where her friends end up, you know, Roz, Harvey, Robin and Theo, what their stories, because I'm sure there's still much you could dive into with the whole, once again, Robin being here as a hobgoblin and him eventually losing everything that makes him a hobgoblin, and what that whole storyline is going down. I would love to actually see more. We have never circled. I mean, obviously, other than his ancestor, that pilot, like we haven't seen anything else about like Theo's power. So it just seemed like that one ghost that Theo could talk to, like that ancestor. But other than that, we've never, like, I don't know if that's something they would, I guess they never planned on diving into that, because I was hoping we would have been able to see more of that, but we never did. Obviously, you know, Roz being, you know, like I brought up way earlier, being a weird sister, as well as, you know, being a witch in general, like as a balancing going to Baxter High as well as the academy. There's definitely elements where you can see like, you could definitely see where they could continue things from here. I just, for the sake of the show, you can definitely see this as being an ending, but I think it is just another ending to another chapter, and there being a new chapter that could definitely take place afterwards. And you could definitely see this being a continuity where they could just be like, yeah, we're going to keep Sabrina dead, but it's just like with the way it ends, it seems concrete, but at the same time, it's like there's definitely room for story for them to be like, nope, Sabrina's back. I mean, and even if they did, like, would they do it considering like it, you know, everything, you know, would she want to come back without Nick and everything? But like I said, it also depends on whether or not we would be going to, you know, that future that Zelda saw last season. Like I said, she was old and Sabrina was there. She's like, I'm so sorry it took me so long to get back here. It seemed like that was more so coming from the fact is that like her being locked away and her finally getting free, or whatever the case may be, to come see see Zelda one last time. We never got the full context of why that was. Maybe it was her being sealed away and she finally got free, or completing a time loop or whatever. But like I said, that's probably changed because of the whole two Sabrina things, them creating the time paradox and everything. But it's still a great ending nonetheless. I like I said, I am curious to see where they would take this next. Like I said, we're not going to get it live action wise, but we're still going to get it comic book wise. So I'd be curious to see necessarily what that story would entail. Because I feel like this is the big, obviously this is like the biggest apocalypse they've dealt with before now, because some have just been like, oh, saving Earth again and again. This is literally saving the entire, everything, the universe, the realms, everything. So would you go bigger from here, or would it kind of go back to being a very small scale story? Because Blackwood isn't dead, but he has been blinded, and basically his body has been scattered to the four corners of the world. Prudence made sure, because it's like, you might be blind and you might be chained up now, but who's to say you continue to always get away and cause massive problems. Another storyline is the whole situation with Wardwell, like keeping that church alive. It's like, now, what does that look like going forward? Interestingly enough, seeing her story, because, granted, she hasn't done as much evil stuff as the last evil thing she did was like shoot Zelda last season, but I don't think we ever saw Judith and Judas again. Like, what was up with them? I don't remember if they ever really went into what happened to them. Because it's just enough. Well, not unless you set up a thing of them being enemies, trying to pick up their father's mantle, continuing it at the very least. The whole Pilgrims of the Church of Night in general, especially because we see more and more people. So I guess that cult-like thing becomes more of a thing for the mortals, and that might be the way of, challenge. Maybe the storyline becomes them rising up against the witches and all the evils. I don't know, especially because all the terrors have been taken care of at this point in time, so it's not like there's any. I don't know. I'd be so curious where that angle of things would go, but yeah. I've rambled on for a very, very long time. I do apologize. It's just some of the stuff that was kind of going through my head. I just felt like I'm talking it out about, but yeah. Really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.